All right. Hi, Bob. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Welcome here. I'm going to shake your hand. There you go. Welcome. All right. So we've had a very wide-ranging discussion, but focused, in rather deeply in a particular region. Many of you will remember the name. We don't hear it often anymore. Of Isilda Solapool, who wrote his very famous book, Technologies of Freedom, and that's partly what we've been talking about over this part of the late afternoon. But we all know as well, and I'm looking around the room, I know most of you, that these technologies can be used, while not entirely neutral, while not neutral at all, although people would like to try to maintain that as cover, that they can be used for benign purposes and malign purposes as well, and it's a matter of how they are used. So we focused in on Middle East and North Africa and the use of social media and information and communications technologies to enhance self-determination and democratic participation. Google is omnipresent. So we're going to ask Bob to briefly, if he could, we want to move beyond that one region of the world and look more widely across the globe at some other regions. So to ask Bob first if he could give us a brief tour of the horizon, where you see people in other places, specific examples, making use of these information technology tools to enhance democratic participation. And I know you were recently in Southeast Asia, so if you want to start there, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to do a tour of the world because I think that could result
I'm asking for examples.
General boredom.
Give us examples.
I mean, having just been in Indonesia, I was fascinated by the strength of both Facebook and Twitter there and the development of social media. I think the real difference there versus other countries in Southeast Asia is the indigenous development of entrepreneurs and sites there that are imitating what has already happened in the West. I have spent some time working on the China issue, and obviously the U.S. government, according to the New York Times and others, is working on ways to use technology to breach the Great Firewall. I worry a lot, actually, about countries where there are democratically elected governments that are using certain issues, in particular child pornography, which we're all against, don't take me wrong here. But they're using it in order to get a foot in the door in order to censor certain subjects on the internet. I think other things that we're seeing that are important are movements in countries ranging from India to Kazakhstan to try to force companies to put their data centers within their national borders. I think that's a pretty big threat to privacy and to the free flow of information across borders. So I think we're seeing a number of trends in the world right now that are worrisome. If the 1990s were a period when people looked at the internet and they said this is a force for good and for democratic development, right now and in the last half of the last decade we are, I think, coming to the realization that this is something that can be used both for, if I can use the title of the last panel, good and evil, although I hate those two words, especially the latter, having been burdened with it as an employee of Google. But I think we're seeing that essentially what we've got is a cat and mouse game that's developed between sophisticated internet users, people who are using it for political reasons, and governments that would, if they had their way about it, control everything that their people see on it.
Would you like to, one of the countries that occurs to me specifically is Iran. Are there any particular comments you'd like to make about that? I mean, there's a very vibrant Persian language community and blogging and so forth.
And I think Iran is interesting on a number of fronts. First of all, on the fact that the Iranian government has, perhaps above all others, demonstrated that you can use technology to hurt people as much as you can use it to try and have them express themselves. I think also Iran demonstrates the growing power, and this I think is something that technology has endowed in a certain way to foreign policy that's never been there before. The growing power of the diaspora, the power of communities of Iranians outside the borders of the countries to have an impact on what's going on inside the borders, both in terms of the kinds of money that they give to different groups and in terms of the tools that are developed. Many people here will unfortunately know the story of Haystack, which was developed as a tool that was supposed to be for the good of Iranian dissidents and ended up at a bad end. So
right.
those were
I think that is very interesting. When Bob and I were talking briefly before this panel, I mean, the role of the now using the social media and so forth, and using information technologies and communications technologies, the ability for the diaspora to communicate with those inside, and for those inside to communicate with the diaspora, and then the influence that the diaspora has. And usually, again, there are several different groups or parties or tribes or different types, stripes and flavors of groups within that. And so it potentially leads to some very interesting and anomalous results, I can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any specific programs that Google has in place in terms of initiatives to try and increase availability of either Google products or services, or in terms of this ability to allow people either access to information? I know that your role is not specifically political, obviously, to enhance democratization, as we mentioned, as an explicit U.S. Policy goal, but in terms of self-determination or ability for access to information or freedom of expression.
Yeah, I wouldn't say self-determination or political change. That's not the business that we're in.
Right.
I mean, one of our goals is to provide a free and independent platform for people to express themselves and for there to be the free flow of information, access of information. Tools that we're working on and have worked on, obviously, our search tool helps people. Gmail is used by dissidents world over because I think it's safer, quote unquote, than others, although nothing is perfectly safe, as people in this room probably are well aware. The speak to tweet, I think, was a very good example, and I thank Jillian for bringing it up. I think another tool of ours that's going to gain in salience and interest is what we call our transparency report, google.com/transparency report. Now there's an original name for you. And on that we show two things. We show requests by governments for us to not show certain URLs. We show these numerically. And we show a second thing in a map, which is requests by government for information on our users. And we've begun to be able to break down those requests into whether they are requests due to criminal intent or requests due to national security or whatever they are. And in the next week or two, you'll be seeing some more developed and granular information available on that. I think that's a tool that if we could get lots more companies and media companies to adopt in some way, to imitate in some way, it would be very helpful for people understanding exactly who out there is looking for information, what they're looking for, and perhaps why they ought to be concerned, or at least proceed cautiously when they do venture onto the internet.
Yeah, very interesting. I know that Transparency International is an NGO that works in the area specifically of transparency and trying to make plain and through visuals and maps and so forth, really to provide these summaries and information. And it has a very interesting effect, obviously, on the governments involved, because they don't want to be viewed as bad guys or be at the top of the list and so forth. So there's a normative value to that kind of.
Well, one hopes that over time it will have that impact. I would say thus far, unfortunately, it's not exactly having that impact. We're having trouble convincing companies in our own sector that this is a good thing to do, much less governments and international bodies. There is some support for this in the recent report by the UN Special Rapporteur on the freedom of expression and the internet, Frank LaRue. And if you want to take a look at that report, it's actually rather short, which is extremely unusual for a UN document.